Hi, and welcome to Let's Get Lit. In today's video, we're going to go over the classic story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by the Grimm's fairy tales. So, I hope you're ready to dive into this classic fairy tale with me, and let's see how much we quite remember of the story. Shall we? Here we go. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs starts out with the queen sitting at her window on a cold winter's night. This queen was sewing and was marveling at the beauty of the falling snow. She accidentally pricks her finger and 3 drops of blood falls into the white snow. When she sees the blood falling into the snow, she says that the blood looks beautiful against all of the white, and it looks especially beautiful on top of the black ebony that the window is made from. She wishes in her heart that she would have a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Not long after, she gave birth to a beautiful little girl who was as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony, and therefore the queen called her Little Snow White. Unfortunately, the mother passes away when she was born, and the king, not long after, remarries a beautiful new woman. This woman had a looking glass, and when she stood in front of it, she would ask the looking glass, "Who is the fairest in all the land?" To which the mirror would respond that she was. As the queen continues to ask this question to her mirror, one day the mirror says that though she is beautiful, Snow White is much fairer. When the queen hears this, she begins to grow hatred in her heart for Snow White. One day, she hires a huntsman to take Snow White into the woods and kill her. She asks the huntsman to bring back her heart as a token that he really had finished the job. However, when he goes out into the woods to kill Snow White, she begs for her life and the huntsman decides to let her go. But as Snow White was going away, he saw a young boar that came running towards him. So he stabs the boar, cuts out its heart, and brings it back and says that it's Snow White's. The cook takes this heart, puts some salt on it, cooks it, and the queen eats it believing that she is eating Snow White's heart. After the huntsman runs away, Snow White runs to the woods to try and find safety. She runs the entire day and finally stumbles upon a little cottage. She goes inside this cottage and she sees beds, plates, a table, and all sorts of dwellings inside. So she eats a little bit from each plate and then goes to each bed to try and figure out which one is right for her. And that's where she sleeps. Then the dwarfs come in. It's nighttime and they all go inside their dwellings to have something to eat and get ready for bed. They light their little candles, and not long after they light the candles, they notice that something is peculiar. All of them state how something has changed, how some of their food has been missing, some of their wine had been gone, and someone had been sleeping in their beds. That is, until they make it to the 7th bed and they see Snow White fast asleep. The dwarves decide they do not want to wake her for she looks so peaceful, and they decide to go ahead and let her sleep inside their bed. The owner of the 7th bed decides to sleep with each one of his brothers during the night, so that way it's fair and equal. When the next morning came, Snow White was startled to see all the dwarfs. The dwarfs told her that they were friendly and that if she wished to stay, all she'd have to do in return is do the cooking and sewing and cleaning and just keep the house neat and tidy. Snow White agrees to this, and the dwarfs go out into their mountains to mine for copper and for other jewels and gems. Before the dwarfs leave, they tell Snow White to make sure that she doesn't answer the door for anyone, because by this point the queen will have realized that Snow White was not dead and she will try to come after her. We then jump back to the evil queen after she had finished the heart of the wild boar. She goes to her looking glass and asks who is the fairest in the land. The looking glass tells her that she is the fairest he can see, but that over the mountains where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well. The queen knows the mirror cannot lie, and in this moment realizes the huntsman has betrayed her, so she dresses up like an old woman and goes over to the dwarf's house. She begins to talk to Snow White and tells her that she's selling lace. Snow White has no thought that this could be the evil queen, so she lets the old woman inside. Soon, Snow White buys some of the lace, and the evil queen, again disguised as an old woman, starts to tie the lace around Snow White. But she ties it so tight that Snow White falls down. At this point, the queen runs back to the castle, and the 7 dwarfs come back that night. They see Snow White lying on the ground, and they're all shocked. They realize the lace has been tied too tight, and they cut it off. After a while, Snow White comes back to life, and again the dwarfs tell her, do not answer the door unless they are home, for the evil queen is trying to get her. When the queen makes it back to her castle, she asks the mirror who is the fairest of them all, to which the mirror made the same comment as before, and said that Snow White was still alive and over the hills. The queen began to be filled with rage, knowing that the dwarves had helped Snow White. So, this time, she resorts to sorcery, which she knows very well, and she poisons a comb for Snow White. So she again makes her way across the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs' house. Now she is still disguised as a different old woman and goes to the door and asks Snow White if she would like a comb. Snow White says that she is not allowed to let anybody inside. So the wicked queen goes up to the window and shows Snow White the beautiful comb that she has to sell. Snow White opens the door and lets the old woman in. As soon as the comb touches Snow White's hair, she falls down and becomes unconscious. The queen then rushes back to her castle. Luckily for Snow White, it was just about evening, and the dwarves had made their way home. When they opened the door, they saw Snow White lying on the ground unconscious, and they immediately take the comb out of her hair. She comes back to life. The dwarves again tell Snow White not to answer the door for anyone under any circumstances. The queen makes it home and asks the looking glass who is the fairest of them all. And again, the mirror answers the exact same way. The evil queen, who is completely fed up at this point, goes into an old room, uses her witchcraft, and concocts a beautiful but poisonous apple. She is bound and determined to kill Snow White one way or another. She paints her face as another elderly woman and makes her way to the seven dwarfs' cottage. When she gets to the cottage, the door is locked, but the window is open. She calls out to Snow White, telling her that she's getting rid of all of her belongings. Snow White says she cannot answer the door for anyone and cannot open it. The old woman shows her that she has some apples left to sell. Snow White sees the apple and how beautiful it is. But again, Snow White says no thank you. The old woman, disguised as the queen, jokingly says, "What, do you think it's poisoned?" Snow White can't even respond to the elderly woman, who has already cut the apple in two, a red section and a white section. The old woman says that she will even eat part of the apple to prove that it's not poisoned. What Snow White doesn't know is that the evil queen was so cunning that only the red part of the apple was poisoned, not the white. So Snow White, after seeing the old woman eat her half of the apple, reaches out and takes a bite of the red portion, where she falls upon the floor, dead. As of seeing this, the evil queen, dressed up as the old woman, runs back to the castle and asks the looking glass who is the fairest of them all, to which he answers, "O queen, in this land thou art fairest of all." When the dwarves come back, they see Snow White on the ground. They immediately begin to check her body for breath, and they checked to see if any magical items were on her, but they couldn't find any. They were all sad, thinking that she had died. They washed her, cleaned her up, and put her in nice clothes, and they began to make a coffin for her. But they remarked how beautiful she was, and even after a few days of weeping, they realized the color in her face was not gone. So they decided to make a glass coffin. That way her beauty can be on display in the mountains. They also wanted to make sure that nobody messes with her body, even though she's passed away. One of the dwarves at all times keeps watch over the coffin. The dwarves do this for a very, very long time. One day, a young prince from a far-off kingdom comes to spend the night with the dwarfs. He sees the coffin and remarks how beautiful the woman inside is. He asks if he may buy the coffin from the dwarfs, and the dwarfs tell him that they will not sell the coffin for any amount of gold in the world, and told the story of Snow White to the prince. The prince asks if he may have it as a gift, and that he will keep it safe and secure for all of his life. The dwarves take sympathy on the prince and let him have her. As the prince is taking the coffin away, through the woods, the coffin stumbles upon a tree stump, which knocks the coffin and Snow White's body. From this, the piece of apple that was in her mouth falls out and she wakes up. She sits up, opens the coffin, and asks what's going on. The prince is over the moon excited, and he tells her everything. He tells her that he's in love with her, and he has been ever since the first time he saw her. He asks if she would be his wife, to which she responds yes. So they go off to his kingdom and plan the wedding. As the wedding was being planned, the evil queen gets an invitation to come by to the wedding. Before she leaves, she is dressed in all of her nicest clothes and asks the glass who is the fairest in the land. The glass answers, "O queen, of all here the fairest art thou, but the young queen is fairer by far, I trow." At first, the queen lets out this horrified, utterly wretched curse. At first, she decides she's not going to go to the wedding, but she realizes that she was going to have no peace until she saw the young queen. When she made it to the castle for the wedding, she realized that it was Snow White who was this new young queen. She was filled with rage, but she didn't stir. However, iron slippers had been ready for her upon the fire and were brought out to her with tongs and set before her. The story ends with the evil queen being forced to put on the red-hot shoes and dance until she drops dead. This concludes the Grimm's Fairy Tales version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I hope you guys enjoyed exploring this classic story with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, stay lit.